Hello everyone and welcome to a new series here on the channels. We are in TEW 2020 here for this series, but we are in the year 1970 to start us off with. The first time we're in the 70s, the entire decade of the 70s as far as for the entire series, from TEW 2016 and now TEW 2020. Mainly just as far as from, 8 years of the channel. Never been in the 70s until now. And the reason why we're doing this today, there's two things. Firstly, one of my favorite saves I've ever done, and just as far as one of my favorite mods I ever played, was the Death of Territories on TW 2005. I always wanted to do that on the channel, but at the time, obviously, it was, it's crazy to think, that game was 11 years old by the time we started the channel, but now, goddamn, now it's, I mean, there'd be no point of doing it now, but, it had its flaws, obviously, because TW 2005 was not as, as far as didn't really comprehend kind of like the trading of talent and all that fun jazz that, even this one somewhat does not have the greatest as far as being able to trade talent and use talent elsewhere, but it's pretty damn good for what we're going to do. And, this mod done by Mammoth, who did the Shifting Sands mod in 2006 as far as that mod, but Mammoth is great. This is, anytime you want to, we start a new save, we definitely want to put over the mod makers. This just for here on the channel, but also I think everybody that does a YouTube series, they should definitely put those guys over, because sure, there's definitely a lot of help elsewhere from people that, if you're posting something on a forum, they'll chime in and do their thing. But obviously they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the leg room, and a lot of times maybe they're not starting it from scratch, but still it's a lot of work, and definitely want to reward those guys for having put in all that time and effort and to be able to play something like this, to go into the 70s, because God, you want to talk about a different time period. I mean, it's a whole, if you were to bring somebody from 1970 into today, as far as January 20th, 2024, they would have no idea how to fucking function. They would have nothing, as far as no idea how to operate any type of smartphone, just anything. The televisions, cars even. Sure, cars are a little bit different. Sure, you could still steer and do all that, but there'd be if you look at a smart car, and even the ones that have a start engine where you just press a button, they'd be pretty blown away by all that. But as far as, it's crazy to think, 1970, God, my parents, my mom had just been born in August of 69, so she's a couple of months old. Then my dad was born in 66, so he was going to be turning 4 in June. So a wild time to think about how long ago that was. But for this save and for this series, the second reason, mainly the big reason for this, is I just thought it would be cool if somebody was like, let's go from the 70s. Go from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and end it at 2020. Now, that's a lot of fucking work. But I was like, well, yeah, I think I can do it. But another thing was just well, you can't just be one company, throughout that time period, because that's a lot. That would be a long time, and it would definitely get redundant. And as far as to be able to really simulate what wrestling would be throughout the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2010s, and ending it into 2020, you would have to just not be, 2 companies or 3 or 4, not even 5. You'd have to be, well, for this case, 8, because that's how many you can use. So this will not only just be a series about 1 company or 2 companies, no, 8 fucking companies, all operated by yours truly, because, well, that's probably the best way of going about it. If I had 8 other people helping me out here, sure, that'd be a great idea, but the series would end after 2 episodes. It's hard to have 8 people on the same page and being able to do all that fun jazz and have it be cohesive and everybody on the same page, because even I've been in a multiplayer save a couple of times, but there was one that we did in the territories. It wasn't really like the 70s, it was more like the early 80s. I want to say it was maybe 81, maybe 82, maybe even 85. I could be wrong, but and immediately, depending on people's knowledge of like how that era worked, immediately was given to the test because people immediately were signing people to written contracts, like exclusive written contracts. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of not the whole point of this whole thing. Like, it's the whole point of the NWA, which obviously now it's been so long that I think most wrestling fans just can't even like comprehend it. Now you see it a little bit in wrestling where people are using other people's talent and it's being a bit of a trade, but it's way different obviously back then in 1970 under the NWA banner, where you would have your touring champion, your NWA heavyweight champion, which at this time in 1970 it's Dory Funk Jr. Him and Terry, because they would just both tour together, because the idea was you could build up a contender, have the contender either beat Terry in a tag or beat Terry in a singles to lead into the title match with Dory. So that it was an easy way to build up a contender and a challenger by using Terry to help elevate somebody. And also, it could go the other way around as far as to help the Funks build up a tag team by having them lose to a tag team, whichever region they were competing in at that time. And, as far as at this time in 1970, it's not everybody's under the NWA banner. There are two major companies that are not involved in the NWA banner, and they all left pretty much around the same time in the 1960s. That would be the AWA and the WWF. Both left. 60 was AWA. Vern Gagne wanted to face, I believe it was Buddy Rogers at the time. I could be wrong. Might have been Lou Thesz, but I'm pretty sure it was Buddy Rogers. Either way, Vern wanted a title match. The NWA board was like, nope, you're not going to get it. Because obviously, Vern was probably going to have him beat, as far as Buddy Rogers, if that was the champion, we'll just say the NWA champion for now. So Vern was kind of like, hey, we should probably get away from them. Because at the time, he didn't outright own the AWA. It was owned by, gosh, I'm forgetting who it was, but it was another partner of his. So what they had to do was basically have a press conference and be like, we are, our press release. It wasn't like a press conference. That basically stating, we're leaving, but we will give, again, I'm just going to use Buddy Rogers for this example. I could be wrong on who it was, but Buddy Rogers has 30 days to accept the challenge of Vern Gagne. If not, Vern Gagne would be crowned the AWA champion, which is kind of a great idea of how to crown a champion. As far as like that's a pretty great way of being like, this guy doesn't want to face us. He's a weak champion. This guy wants to fight. He wants to wrestle. He wants to be the guy, and he's got 30 days to accept it. If not, he's going to be our champion. So it's just a great way of elevating yourself as far as like your new promotion, to be like, listen, this is going to be our new champion, and he wants to be the NWA champion. He wants to beat the NWA champion, but the NWA champion's too scared of him. That also happened in 63 with the WWF. Vince Sr. wanted Bruno. Yeah, this was actually Buddy Rogers. I know that for sure. He wanted Bruno to beat Buddy Rogers. Also, Bruno wanted to beat Buddy Rogers. Buddy didn't want to put him over. So they created their own belt as well. And that's when they separated. They would actually come back into the NWA banner. I want to say it was 72. But I think for this save, as just spoiler alert, that is one of the 8 companies we're running right now is the WWF. As Vincent James McMahon. I don't think we're going to go back into the NWA banner. I think we're going to let it ride for just a little bit to see how it's going to go, not under the NWA banner, for both the WWF and for the AWA. We're going to be booking both the AWA and the WWF. So that's going to be exciting to kind of go from outside the NWA and then also inside the NWA with a couple of promotions. We'll be running Jim Crockett Promotions. So that's, Jim Crockett Promotions is pretty fairly new at the time. I want to say, well, actually, 1931 is when they started, but I want to say, as far as them actually running the Mid-Atlantic and TV, because at this time they actually still have they have Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling on television, but it's not kind of the same value as far as like some of the other promotions in the wrestling world at this time. Obviously, becomes a major player in the mid 80s and even the early 80s. You know, it becomes a bit of a hotbed and one of the biggest promotions in the world. Even obviously it becomes WCW and all that fun jazz. But that's one of the promotions we'll be running. We'll also be running Western State Sports, Dory Funk Seniors and the Funks promotion. Obviously, being able to book the home promotion of the NWA champion is very fun, but this roster's pretty crazy. You have a young Harley Race, you have a young Dickie Murdoch in Dusty Rhodes, which Dusty I think is way down here. Oh no, there he is, Dusty. And as far as the young Funk brothers, it's pretty awesome. And also you have Gory Guerrero, you have Killer Carl Cox, Emilie Dupree, as far as coming in from kind of all over the world. The original Mr. Wrestling, as far as from that era. It also, well, not going to be the only promotion in Texas as far as running. We'll be running Big Time Wrestling, which is obviously turns into world class. Fritz Von Erich here, as far as I forget when exactly they turn into world class, but Fritz at this time is obviously, which this is another thing to talk about. That you're going to see multiple NWA American Heavyweight Championships. So I think in total, I want to say there's 12 that are happening at the same time, which is pretty confusing, obviously. Basically, here's how it's kind of mapped out. San Francisco has one, which you'll be seeing because we are going to be, which the whole office was the Pacific Coast Athletic Corporation, which it's Rorshire's Big Time Wrestling in San Francisco. That's who ran the Cow Palace. Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson, Stan Stasiak, Peter Maivia, even Pedro Morales. That's how Rocky Johnson got with The Rock's mom, and that's how The Rock was born. So that's kind of just from a whole different perspective. But this, San Francisco had one, Texas had one, which Fritz pretty much won I think 10 or 11 times or something crazy like that. I think we could actually look at the belt as far as, you can see already he's already run it 8 times. And I think he wins it a couple of more times in this decade in real life. But that's also when if you saw Iron Claw at the beginning, it's him winning this. And also I think he didn't win the Texas Heavyweight title at this time until, it was mainly kind of the mid-60s was kind of that time period when he was winning that belt. Mainly now, he's winning just the NWA American Heavyweight title. As far as Big Time Wrestling is our other promotion, we're also going to be Japan. It's funny just to say we're going to be Japan, but the only promotion at this time, besides the women's side, is Japan Pro Wrestling Alliance, the JWA. Now, obviously, in 1972, things get interesting. Baba starts All Japan, Inoki starts New Japan. Now, we're in a unique spot where obviously we're before that time. We can run this save as a kind of what if we never had them split and they were just the JWA to the end of time, or even have a split later on. We could do it however we want, which that's going to be pretty fun to see. But I just want to talk about that while also talking now back to the U.S. title situation. There's a WWF version of the belt, which I believe Bobo Brazil's the champion. So basically, this is another talking point here. So Bobo and the Sheik. The biggest stars probably at this time in 1970. Bruno's one as far as drawing power for sure. Vern's somewhere around there. Obviously Dory somewhere around there. But Sheik and Bobo, they were basically a touring act as far as the U.S. title. They had a Detroit version. They had a version in Toronto, which is kind of funny, to have a U.S. title in Toronto. But that version, the Detroit version, and this version were pretty much all contested in Sheik versus Bobo Brazil matches as far as them trading the belt back and forth. So that's kind of where we're at with that belt. Obviously, that belt in the WWF version, it spans turns into the North American title for a little bit, and then obviously we get the Intercontinental title. For the Detroit version of the belt, which that's also just Big Time Wrestling, that's the OG Big Time Wrestling, we're the Sheik in as far as for this avatar, which is pretty awesome, because obviously Sheik at this time, even though he's 43 at this time, he's still one of the biggest acts in the wrestling world. For what he's doing, he's traveling all over the world. He's going to Japan, but he's going to obviously the WWF. He's working at it's weird, you can't really do that now because we're the avatar of the Sheik, so we can't. He has to be exclusively at Big Time Wrestling, so that's kind of weird. But at this time, like even into the 70s, Sheik and Bobo, even though they're in their mid 40s at this time, they're still like the biggest touring act in wrestling, and that match can draw anywhere and everywhere because obviously, Big Time Wrestling. Not only do they run Detroit and kind of some of the other greater area of Michigan, but they run Ohio, they run West Virginia, they run into Illinois, even sometimes in Indiana. But to go to that and then also work into the WWF, to work in Montreal for, and Toronto even, because they worked Montreal here for Big Time Wrestling, but they also would work for Toronto for Maple Leaf Wrestling in Ontario as well, just Toronto and the Ontario area, but just there as well. He would even work sometimes in Texas. He would just anywhere he could. He'd sometimes even work Hollywood wrestling. Him and Freddie Blassie would just kind of bleed all over the place. But yeah, that's just kind of talking about the U.S. title. Wanted to talk about that. But as far as those 8 promotions that we are, so I think we covered all of them. I might have missed one. Let's just take a look here. Oh yeah, Stu Hart. Yeah, we're also going to be Stampede Doi. So we are going to be running, as you can see, in Japan, in Canada, and in America here for the first part of this. Now, we're going to rotate out of promotions, in and out. We're going to jump around so we can kind of hit everywhere and hit a bunch of different places. Mainly to make this feel like it's a organic save where we're watching wrestling evolve throughout time and we can kind of come in and out of places to really get a grasp on what's going on maybe in other places of the world. Some of the places I definitely want to run, obviously all Japan women's, because we've never done that on the save, and Joshi's rule and women's wrestling in Japan. At this time, I'm not really familiar with. That's why I didn't start with them. Once it gets into the 80s and into the 90s, obviously, that's kind of more of where I'm at as far as what I know and what I understand. So at this point, if I were to run it here, it would just be picking names and just trying to educate myself throughout it, which is a great idea. But at the same time, we'll let them figure it out for now. We'll hop in maybe a little bit later on, because it's still a pretty newish thing at the time. 1968 is when they started, so we'll let them kind of handle their business. I would love, Bob Geigel, Missouri, and obviously St. Louis for sure. Sam Muchnick wins, Harley Race wins the NWA title from Dory Funk Jr. That's when he presents him with the 10 pounds of gold, and that's basically the version that everyone kind of associates with the NWA title being. Because right now, as far as, I don't think we'll be able to see it because we're not in the Alliance. Yeah, we'll have to, we'll just jump on over to, let's just jump over to Jim Crockett, just for this. But as far as this belt, this version of the NWA title, this is the Gene Knitsky, Lou Thesz, Buddy Rogers, that era belt, Pat O'Connor. I almost been Pat O'Connor here. Yeah, we can just look. That Vern Gagne wanted to beat. And, of course, as you can see, they never got that match. So that's hence why the AWA started. But, yeah, it's crazy to think. Bobo Brazil, NWA Heavyweight Champion. I mean, that's kind of revolutionary. I think one of your first, let's see, probably first, not even first 10 champions is African American star in early 62. Oh, I guess kind of the fall of 62. It's a pretty big deal. That's, I mean, especially in America, it's not the most forgiving place in the most tolerative places at that time, which is just very, very unfortunate. But awesome to see that at least history, as far as hey, we got that one right, as far as having Bobo Brazil be the NWA champion at one point, and I think it's definitely well deserved. Bobo ruled. Bobo does rule as far as still, even in 1970, as far as from a drawing perspective. Like we said, him and the Sheik, those matches, basically anywhere in the country. If they were at Cobo Hall Arena, it's a sellout. If they're even in the Garden, even they could probably sell it out. It wouldn't be that far fetched for sure. And I mean that just again shows you the drawing power compared to like Bruno, who if you just put his name on the marquee, everyone's going to show up. But when you have an actual match that's a hot match and that everybody wants to see, especially at this era where nothing was really on television, you made it to where, because at this, the business model in the 70s and even most of the 80s, I'd say kind of the first half of the 80s, it's an arena show business, it's a house show business. Television is not the focal point whatsoever. It's house shows. It's getting people come to the arena every week or every month or whatever it may be to come see this person. So that means that there's going to be a lot of title matches that are not going to be happening on television. And now, as far as how this series is going to play out, as far as we'll go back to like the newsletter thing here for this. So for this save, it's kind of a passion project as far as I want to be able to kind of, in a way, replicate how wrestling was viewed at the time. In a lot of the 70s and the 80s, once satellite television came, and obviously the TBS happened with the Superstation, that kind of changed how wrestling was viewed for a long time. But for the most part, the 70s and the early 80s, it was a magazine business where people would see or catch up on wrestling from other places of the world, because obviously they could not watch it on television or anything because they didn't have like satellite. They'd have to tape trade or something like that. So the best way to kind of replicate that is to have our own little newsletter. So it's just the TEW newsletter because that's what it says here on the home screen here. So just went with that. And we're gonna go more into depth with this for the second episode, because this is kind of more of like the intro episode. But these are gonna be basically what the episodes will be for the 70s aspect of this. Each month will basically be its episode, and it's gonna be kind of like recap form, where you're viewing it through the eyes of a magazine, which is kind of unique as far as I don't think no one's, just as far as to be able to do it like that, it's going to take some creative things as far as how to exactly do that, because we still want to show who's like actually some of the top stars and like show maybe some of the stats and whatnot, but we also want to make sure that it's a not so much like a video game aspect of it where it's you're looking at numbers and you're seeing who's the best. You can kind of read it and see it for yourself, so it's more of like a visual thing. At least that's the attempt here, and you could see some of the kind of articles here. We got an exclusive interview with the Stampede North American champion Billy Robinson. That's gonna one of the articles as far as in the newsletter. In a highlight of Giant Baba, who's the champion over at JWA. He's also the tag team champion, Tim and Inoki, as the B1 Cannon are rolling at that point. And then we're talking about the Sheik and Bobo, as far as we want to put that over as a big time aspect. And then also a little tidbit from Eddie Graham, which is, we're not using Eddie Graham at this time, but we eventually will, and just kind of talking about how he guarantees that Championship Wrestling from Florida will crown the NWA World Champion sooner rather than later. So a little just kind of tidbit there. So the magazine's going to eventually change over time. Right now it's just going to be a newsletter. Then it's going to be called a magazine. And it's going to, go through different shapes and changes and whatnot. Because we want to keep it as fresh as we can. But that's just kind of the magazine cover. Or the newsletter cover, I guess, for that perspective. But as far as what else we want to talk about here. For I would say for a lot of the championships that you're going to see, the biggest change that you'll probably see right off the rip will be the WWF International Tag Team Championships. Which, as you can see, yeah, at this time, uh, Vince Sr., I don't even think it was Vince Sr., honestly. So this is going to be another tidbit thing. So, as you can see, Studio Wrestling. Now, that was not a WWWF. I think I used one too many W's. Well, the World Wrestling Federation. They did not have that television. It was Bruno Sammartino's promotion, which was... Oh, God, I'm forgetting what it was now. I was hoping they would say it here, but no, it does not say it in the bio. But basically, what had happened? He was, during his reign, which he still is the champion right now, obviously. He's been the champion since 63 when he beat Buddy Rogers. But this championship reign, during, I want to say it was 66, maybe 65, he became the sole owner of, I'll just say, it's a Pittsburgh promotion, but we'll just say Steel City something. I don't know. As far as I wish I knew it off the top of my head. I can't believe I'm blanking on it. It's like Super Sports something. So we'll just Super Sports something. They had their studio wrestling that was on their local Pittsburgh television affiliate. And that match, as you can see, as far as back here, as far as with the Batman and Bruno Sammartino, that's when that took place. Now, that reign itself, as far as beating Mitsuya Arakaru, and Toru Tanaka, that reign is not officially recognized, like, in real life. Mainly, it's just, outside of Pittsburgh. Now, here's the thing. The Batman character, for the time, if we're talking the mid-60s and the late 60s, it's Tony Marino, by the way, as far as Tony Marino, who's, is he under the Batman character? But yeah, it's as far as, Tony Marino, who is, Lady Foster's grandfather. Funny enough, I just figured that out, or just found out about that, as far as, when preparing for this. So the Batman, being a character, obviously, is, 1966. The Batman television show, it's, it catapults Batman into being not only just as far from a pulp culture perspective, but like the highest selling highest selling comic book character at the time. Like, it's selling close to 1 million copies a year. Which was pretty much unheard of at the time. It's wild. So, at that time, it was like, well, why not put somebody in a Batman costume and let him just build up from the popularity from there. And that's pretty much what happened. As you can see, he pretty much becomes the second top babyface at the time. He, has the tag belts with Bruno. But I would say by 1970, Batman phase, it's still somewhat popular, but definitely like Superman's back on top. And because it's been off television for a couple of years now, it basically ran from 66 to 68, as far as Adam West's Batman. That, I think, coming off of television and not kind of being in the pulp culture eyes anymore. Still, they would obviously run, like, reruns and shit like that, but because it was, 1970s, you had, like, fucking 5 channels. You kind of have to go with some, just kind of, as far as going with reruns and stuff that's been added before and has been shown before. Really, at this time, I would say Batman, as far as the wrestler Tony Marino's character, pretty much is on the way out. And these belts themselves, as far as to go back to the belts, the International Tag Team titles, I want to say they get retired around the same time the United States Heavyweight title gets retired, and it turns into, obviously, the World Tag Team titles, which, and that's the same thing with the U.S. title. Once it goes from the North America to the Intercontinental, and then we're kind of into what the modern day wrestling of what, a Vince McMahon organization is. And what's funny enough, and what's crazy about this too, this is probably the only time that you will see a save where Vincent Kennedy McMahon is not on the roster, because he has not really been a part of the roster at this time. It's Vincent James McMahon, who is somebody that I myself, as far from the 30, almost 30 years of being a wrestling fan, I don't think there's somebody that I have more enamored, maybe not like enamored with, but more just fascination. I think it's kind of the better word for it, because there's just really not a whole lot about him, especially considering who his dad is, and his, well, considering who his son is rather, but his father too, Jess, was a pretty like prominent figure in Harlem, and he was a boxing promoter. That's basically how Capital Wrestling, which that's what the name was, the Capital Wrestling Corporation was before the WWF name change. Um, that was a huge get to have somebody that understood boxing, and I think that's how Vince Sr. got his kind of philosophy on booking. You can see a lot of it with how he booked Bruno against guys like Ivan Koloff, guys like, as far as seeing him battle, into other, top stars with Pedro Morales. You're having kind of somebody from a different nationality at each time to kind of promote their. Because at this time, 1970, you're talking about a New York that is a pretty big melting pot. Pedro Morales, Puerto Rican, Killer Kowalski being, what was he? I was about to say Polish, but I forget what his ethnicity was. Well, I guess you could say Canadian, but as far as just from Montreal, but Killer Kowalski, George Steele, as far as George Steele with hair at this time, which is kind of wild. It is just kind of shocking how he was a jobber for like a couple of years. He was the teacher, the student. He was like a mass gimmick. Then he turns into the animal, and then he goes a little, he starts biting people and clawing at people, and it's same thing with like Gorilla Monsoon, kind of the same. This kind of big, giant, larger than life character. Just kind of those guys having more big time personalities from all sorts of places from around the world, because New York is such a melting pot. You have people from Germany, you have people from Polish descent, you have people as far as obviously Puerto Rican and Italian, like we said, but all over the world. Immigrants, either people that were born like Bruno, who's born in Italy, who's literally an immigrant coming here to the United States, and as far as you're talking first generation or second generation, maybe their parents came to America as far as, and now are living their lives and living the American dream, and it's such a different kind of, as far as different feeling than the 70s were in the 60s, because it was a change of not only what the 60s were, ended on a pretty tumultuous time in America, as far as Vietnam's going on, and it's at this time, as far as the most troops in Vietnam is not really the case anymore. That the highest point was, I want to say, was 68. It's coming down, but it's still like it's a turmoil time, and everyone's like, we should not even be there. And it's a whole, the whole kind of country is at odds, and you're going to see that more and more. As far as in the summer of, I want to say it's 66, might have been 67, Muhammad Ali refused to be drafted, and changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, and so there's no heavyweight champion in boxing right now because he got stripped because of that, and it's a whole wild era for just as far as like sports, and as far as like combat sports, I guess you could call it, because it's just boxing and wrestling at this time. But as far as just as with the WWF, you could tell Vince. Well, actually, go back to Vince Sr. With Vince Sr., kind of his booking philosophy, he very much got that from his dad, who was a boxing promoter. He was actually one of the first. He might have been the first person in Harlem to have African American boxers on his cards. So that was pretty awesome to think, as far as especially Harlem at this time now. As far as in 2024, definitely can safe to say Harlem is one of the, as far as talking about black excellence and how much great African American, not just talent as far as from a sports perspective, but from an art and music, and it's very much a huge deal that that happened as far as, especially so early on, because that was around 1930s, 1940s, around that time. It's a different America, and as far as just, I think that's also just to kind of wrap around to how Vince kind of booked a lot of his talent. It very much feels like a boxing way of promoting with your major stars from different ethnicities, and you see that a lot in like combat sports today, not just boxing but in MMA. Seeing Brazilians root for their Brazilian champions, or seeing, as far as people from the UK, when Tyson Fury is heavyweight champion, which still is heavyweight champion in boxing, very much is a big deal to have a English-born, heavyweight champion, and obviously the people of England are going to back him for a lot of times and a lot of the situations, and for somebody of just when Mike Tyson was very popular, obviously, as far as running through people and just destroying talent all over the world. He was at the height of his popularity. I would definitely say a huge African American following. Same thing for Deontay Wilder today. As far as seeing somebody that is very much, that's just kind of the way boxing always in martial arts kind of is. I'm not like that. I've heard people say that as far as, oh, thanks a lot there, Alexa. But I've heard, as far as being a major thing, especially around the 70s and the 80s. If you saw a white boxer against a black boxer, most of the white people would be rooting for the white guy. I don't know. I just don't. I never subscribe to that ideology, but I definitely could understand it. It just seems like a thing where it's like, one of us type of deal. And I think that it is true for professional wrestling, even today. I think, you saw it in Puerto Rico with Bad Bunny at Backlash. That crowd was fucking rocking for him. And it's because he's one of their own. And it's when you get to see somebody from your neighborhood or from your background achieving at a high level like that, it's awesome. You can't help but not root for the guy. And you could see that a lot with Bruno at that time. Bruno, there's a huge Italian demographic in New York, and still is, but especially at this time, everybody just thought he was unstoppable. And it's kind of funny to think, like, Bruno's 5'10", which is just, when you think of, like, Bruno, I don't know why, I always thought Bruno was just, like, larger than life, like, he's like 6'4", 260, but he's like 5'10", 250, which is still a barrel chest of a man, but it's just kind of crazy to think about it from that perspective. That's also why we picked the WWF, just because I love Vince Sr. But as far as from I'm trying to think what else we can talk about here at the end of this first episode, because the big thing is just, again, the episodes, the way they're going to be coming out. It's not going to be so much of a weekly thing, because there's so much to do. There's 8 promotions we're booking at the same time, a lot of navigating around, a lot happening, and we're going to try and focus not only just our 8, but other places around the world. I definitely want to showcase Maple Leaf Wrestling of Frank Tunney, which obviously, that's how Jack Tunney becomes the president of the WWF once basically they get bought out by Vince. He comes over to work for him. I would love to, Mid-America, Nick Ulis, which was basically more of the Southeast, but Bearcat Brown, Jackie Fargo, kind of more so Memphis, but not full-on Memphis at that time. But that's just basically, what they were running as far as from that perspective. The WWA, which was basically an affiliate of the AWA, it's Dick the Bruiser's promotion. He basically run like Indianapolis, trying to think, Chicago, just some other places, kind of in the Midwest, basically. The WWA, which was, or the WAA rather, excuse me, as far as I don't think we'll probably actually go at the WAA rather. Um, Tri-State, which was Leroy McGurk's, which turns into Mid South. Obviously you see already Bill Watts is the fucking booker. Danny Hodge being the junior heavyweight champion and one of the biggest wrestling stars to ever come out of the state of fucking Oklahoma. And you also have the Briscoes. You have Jack and Jerry, which I don't even see them on the roster. The Medics, Ox Baker. What else I'm seeing on this list? Skandar Akbar. As far as if you ever see the Graham Norton show, the interview with Cena and Matthew McConaughey, and he was talking about seeing Mid South and seeing Skandar Akbar. That's maybe not really around this time. That's kind of more late 70s probably, because I feel like McConaughey's like my dad's age, so yeah, he'd be around this time, mid 70s probably. But I'm trying to think also what else to talk about besides some of the promotions we'll be using and seeing throughout the time. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it on what this save is entailing. As far as, my God, it's a huge task. That's a lot of wrestling. That's a lot of years. It's definitely something that, sure, on the channel we've booked promotions for over 1,000 shows and whatnot, but that's nothing in comparison to going from 1970 to 2020. But fuck it, I think we can do it. It's going to be a task, that's for sure. But I believe, and I got faith in us. I think this is going to be not only just a learning experience for me, but also a learning experience for you guys watching, because I'm sure a lot of people are not fully up to date on what 1970s wrestling was all about, and I mean not so much for me either. It's something that, as far as from being on the channel, definitely one of the weakest as far as knowledgeable things go for the 70s. Once we kind of get more into the 70s, it's kind of like late 60s, early 70s, kind of out of my wheelhouse, but once it kind of gets into the mid to late 70s, that's kind of when things start clicking for me. But yeah, I think that will do it. I'm trying to think what else we could go over. Pretty sure that's it. But yeah, because a lot of the television shows at the time, not a huge factor. A lot of places had it. I want to say Stampede had a television show. Yeah, they had Stampede Wrestling. It was just, it's a different type of environment than it is now. Because, like, again, you're only, it's only the local affiliate of that television station. So, Calgary, CFA, CTV, it's owned by, it's a CBS thing, but it's obviously just a local Alberta, Calgary section. And, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how wrestling was at the time. And obviously that's going to change and evolve over time as the years go by. But also another thing, too, is just how kind of small some of these rosters are is going to be interesting. Because we're used to having bigger rosters. But yeah, I got a young-ish Abdullah the Butcher before he got really fat. Of course, Billy Robinson this time. So trying to think who else. Ed Whalen. As far as he's the fucking announcer at the time. Yeah, he's a sports director for the TV. I didn't know that. Huh. But yeah, that just kind of knew Ed Whalen who did that. Dan Crockett. How about that? As far as as far as yeah, it's just kind of fun to see a Dan Crockett appearance. Yeah, this is, before all the Hart kids are involved. No Brett, no Bruce, no Keith. It's a whole different Stampede than what kind of I'm used to seeing. Same thing with the JWA is a little bit different because there are, you got Bob and Inoki, you got Haruka Aijin, a young Haruka Aijin, which is something I never thought I'd see the day. Skull Murphy was like just a run-of-the-mill kind of foreign gaijin that came in. The Andersons are actually on excursion at this time. They're learning in Japan at this time, Oli and Gene. So that's why they're over here. Freddie Blassie, really a huge name. He was a vampire over there because of him bleeding and drinking, well, not drinking blood, but pretending to drink blood. Which he's kind of at the final years of his in-ring career. So he's about to be wrapping it up and becoming a manager full time. Oh, Kuyatsu Yamamoto. Wow. A young Kuyatsu Yamamoto. Huh. And of course, a middle-aged Joe Higuchi. Not a bald Higuchi. Higuchi with hair. It's wild. I wonder what his refereeing is at this time. Well, in 85, that's still... Yeah, I mean, he becomes, obviously, like, the GOAT Japanese referee until Kawada. Like, Kyoei... why can I not say Kyoei Wada as far as having an aneurysm there? Till he becomes the ref, but that's just a great little shout for him. But yeah, as far as the wrestling, the Tell Extreme Wrestling newsletter, that's going to be how you're going to be seeing a lot of the series, at least for the first probably 10 years or so. Just kind of wild to think. But we're going to try to highlight a lot of big-time title matches as well and try to show them off as a big-time deal, especially, with Dory Funk Jr. and Vern Gagne and for Bruno. Like, those obviously big-time title matches we want to give showcasing for the NWA Tag Team titles who are the champions at that time, actually? Let's just go Jim Crockett. I'm trying to think who they would have been at that time. Was it, did they not have any champions? I knew Danny Hodge was the junior heavyweight champion, because he pretty much always is. Because Danny Hodge fucking ruled, but he was, technically not a huge guy for, at least for pro wrestling standards, quote unquote. But, yeah, it's wild. I'll have to look up when the NWA titles become a thing. But, yeah, as far as that, we'll do it for this first episode here of the territories, I guess is what we'll call it, for the first part. And then it'll turn into, I don't even know what the fuck we'll call it once it gets out of it. Maybe it'll just always be the territories because that's kind of the idea, too, of why I wanted to do it. If somebody booked from 1970 to 2020 and the territories never died, that's pretty much the synopsis of what this save is. Hopefully it's a success. We'll see. This is going to be very, very tough to juggle. But I gotta believe. Gotta have faith. And we'll catch you guys, well, whenever. As far as next month, hopefully. It's going to be a process for sure. Gotta be patient. That's all I ask for everybody. Is just to be patient about this save. Because obviously, not only... This save alone is a lot of work. But when you're also juggling the other saves on the channel... It's a lot. It's a lot. But we want to also... I want to give it the time it deserves because I think it's a great concept. And hopefully it's flushed out into a fun thing to watch. That's the plan. But yeah, thank you all for watching. And we'll catch you guys next time. Take care, everyone.